The Untruth of Fragility by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. Nassim Taleb described safetyism as a culture or belief system in which safety has become a sacred value, which means that people become unwilling to make trade-offs demanded by other practical and moral concerns. But what if I tell you that when parents try to protect their children from going out and play with mud, riding a bike, or playing in the street with sticks and trees, they aren't really helping them? In August of 2009, Max Holt, a 3 years old kid, had his very first day in preschool. But before that, his parents needed to attend a mandatory orientation session where they were explained the rules and procedures by the kid's teacher. The most important rule, judging by the time was taken discussing it, was no nut of any kind. The reason, the risk to children with peanut allergies. So there was a prohibition on bringing anything that could possibly contain nuts into the building. That was reasonable. However, there was an even more reasonable question, and one of the parents asked, does anyone here have a child with any kind of nut allergy? The question was not answered, but the parent was told not to put anyone on the spot and not to make them feel uncomfortable. There's no way for us to blame the school for being cautious, yet it answered to a phenomenon in the USA. Allergies in the country weren't that common. They have been increasing since 1990. This happens because people weren't exposed to nuts. There wasn't a way in which their bodies could tolerate any kind of nuts compound. The prohibition made their bodies weaker, not capable to assimilate nuts. Some investigators studied this event and discovered that the reason of this increase was precisely due to that parents and teachers had started protecting children from exposure to peanuts. And well, this is a perfect example of the concept that will be developed in this video, the untruth of fragility. And this will help you to understand the great untruth. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. When children are raised in a culture of safetyism, which teaches them to stay emotionally safe while protecting them from every imaginable danger, it may set up a feedback loop. Kids become more fragile and less resilient, which signals to adults that they need more protection, which then makes them even more fragile and less resilient. There's an old saying that goes this way: prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. The thing is, there are some systems that get stronger if they get pushed around, like the immune system. So children must be exposed to challenges and stressors, of course, within limits and taking into account the age. Or maybe they will fail to mature into strong and capable adults, and they are not going to be able to engage productively with people and ideas that challenge their beliefs and moral convictions. Safetyism deprives young people of the experiences that their anti-fragile minds need, thereby making them more fragile, anxious, and prone to seeing themselves as victims. Well, safety is good, of course, and keeping others safe from harm is virtuous, but virtues can become vices when carried to extremes. The thing is, some systems are fragile. For example, a glass of wine falling from a table will break easily and cannot heal anymore, so you must handle it gently and keep it away from harm. However, if you throw a plastic glass out of a table, nothing is going to happen. It can withstand shocks. That's resilience. Plastic can survive repeated falls to the floor and no harm will be done. In comparison, the author exposes the term anti-fragile. Many of the important systems in our economic and political life are like our immune systems. They require stressors and challenges in order to learn, adapt, and grow. Systems that are anti-fragile become rigid, weak, and inefficient when nothing challenges them or pushes them to respond vigorously. So, kids are free to pursue their own interests, free of adult intervention. They acquire skills, values, ideas, and information that will stay with them for life. In the absence of that freedom, kids don't acquire the skills, values, and ideas necessary to become their own persons. The foolishness of overprotection is apparent as soon as you understand the concept of anti-fragility. Given that risks and stressors are natural and avoidable parts of life, parents and teachers should be helping kids develop their innate abilities to grow and learn from such experiences. But these days, we seem to be doing precisely the opposite. We're trying to clear away anything that might upset children, not realizing that, in doing so, we are repeating the peanut allergy mistake.
Concept creep. Taking into account what was exposed before, we can tell that the meaning of safety has been expanded, and now the word not only means a sense of staying out of danger, but also includes the meaning emotional safety. It happened because the meaning of safety underwent a process called concept creep. But what is it? According to Nick Haslam, an Australian psychologist who published an article titled Concept Creep Psychologists Expanding Concepts of Harm and Pathology, he examined several concepts in clinical and social psychology, included abuse, bullying, trauma, and prejudice, to determine how their usage has changed since the 1980s. He found out that the meaning had expanded in two directions. The first one, downward. It is applied to less several situations. And the second one, outward, to include new but conceptually related phenomena. To clarify, let's take, for example, the word trauma. The original meaning of this word was used only by psychiatrists to describe a physical agent causing physical damage. However, in the 1980s, it was created a concept called post-traumatic stress disorder. To The word was the first time used to describe a mental illness and not a physical damage, as in the beginning. It is quite understandable since the word has been taken to emphasize the consequences after a terrifying experience. Yet, trauma has been expanded to the downward direction. But now, in the 2000s, the word has been taken within subjective bias, and therapeutic community had crept down so far that it includes anything experienced by an individual as physically and emotionally harmful, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well being. In other words, any subjective experience of harm is being taken as trauma. As a result, the word trauma became much more widely used not just by mental health professionals but by anyone. It has been expanded to the outward direction. A conceptual change is inevitable and often well motivated, but concept creep runs the risk of pathologizing everyday experiences and encouraging a sense of virtuous but impotent victimhood. Hygiene and safetyism. As a result of the safetyism phenomena, there is a preoccupation in the current generation that was born since 1995 that the psychologist Jean Twenge has called iGen, short for Internet Generation, as well known Generation Z. Twenge shows that iGen suffers from far higher rates of anxiety and depression than did millennials generation at the same age, and it ends up with higher rates of suicide. This trend began with the rapid growth of social media in the years after the iPhone was introduced in 2007. Twenty noted two things. First, the aging generation is obsessed with safety, and the psychologists defined it safety as emotional safety. The focus on being emotional safety leads many of teens to believe what the doctor describes: one should be saved not only from an accident and sexual assault, but from people who disagree with you. Second, the aim of the hygiene to create safe spaces and trigger warnings to not disturb anybody's sensibility. This is commonly happening in universities as long as the millennials are getting graduated and hygiene is replacing them. It is not hygiene's fault. The author proposes that today's students were raised by parents and teachers who had children's best interest at heart, but their effort to protecting them often did not give them freedom to develop their own anti-fragility. In sum, first, like the immune system, children must be exposed to challenges and stressors within limits and in age-appropriate ways, or they will fail to mature into strong and capable adults, able to engage productively with people and ideas that challenge their beliefs and moral convictions. Second, safetyism deprives young people of the experiences that their anti-fragile minds need, thereby making them more fragile, anxious, and prone to seeing themselves as victims. And third, concepts sometimes creep. Concepts like trauma and safety have expanded so far since the 1980s that they are often employed in ways that are no longer grounded in legitimate psychological research.